Imagine opening a history book and finding out that one of the largest empires in human history wasn't built by a king or an emperor or even a country. It was built by a business, a company with shareholders, quarterly profits, corporate meetings, and a logo. At its peak, this company controlled an army twice the size of Britain's. It collected taxes from tens of millions of people. It decided who ruled kingdoms, started wars, ended dynasties, and governed nearly a fifth of the world's population. Today, corporations influence governments all over the world. But 400 years ago, one company went much further. It didn't just influence a country, it owned one. This is the story of the British East India Company. Part 1. A Business Opportunity. The year is 1600. Europe is obsessed with the East. Ships returning from Asia carry cargo worth fortunes: pepper, nutmeg, silk, tea, cinnamon. Today, these are ordinary products. Back then, they were luxury goods so valuable they could make merchants rich beyond imagination. The problem was getting them. The journey from Europe to Asia was nearly 25,000 kilometers. Storms destroyed ships. Disease killed sailors. Pirates waited along the routes, and powerful empires controlled the ports. It was simply too expensive and too dangerous for one merchant to finance alone. So a new idea emerged. Instead of one trader risking everything, hundreds of investors would pool their money together. If one ship sank, nobody lost everything. If it returned safely, everyone shared the profits. It sounds obvious today, but at the time it was revolutionary. This became one of the world's first great joint stock companies. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter. It granted a small group of London merchants exclusive rights to trade across much of Asia. The organization was called the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. Thankfully, history shortened the name, the British East India Company. At first, its ambitions were surprisingly modest. It didn't want to conquer kingdoms. It didn't want political power. It simply wanted spices and profit. But history has a way of changing plans. Part 2. Trading turns into power. The company's first voyages were incredibly successful. Ships returned overflowing with pepper and cloves. Investors doubled and sometimes tripled their money. Money attracted more money. Soon, larger fleets crossed the oceans. Trading posts appeared along India's coastline. Warehouses became ports. Ports became fortified settlements. The company insisted these defenses were purely for protection. After all, pirates were everywhere. European rivals were constantly fighting, and local conflicts threatened trade. So they hired guards, then more guards, then professional soldiers. By the early 1700s, the East India Company had begun recruiting Indian soldiers known as sepoys. They were cheaper than sending troops from Britain, and they understood the local languages and terrain. Year after year, the army grew larger, not because the company wanted an empire, but because protecting profits required more force, and more force created more opportunities. A dangerous cycle had begun. Trade created wealth. Wealth created armies. Armies created power. Power created even more wealth. Eventually, the company wasn't simply negotiating with rulers anymore. It was deciding which rulers stayed in power. Part 3. The battle that changed everything. Everything changed in the 1757. The company faced the young ruler of Bengal. Bengal wasn't some remote province. It was one of the richest places on earth. Its textile industry supplied markets across Asia and Europe. Its fertile farmland generated enormous wealth. Many historians believe Bengal's economy rivaled entire European nations. Whoever controlled Bengal controlled extraordinary riches. The company's forces were dramatically outnumbered, around 3,000 soldiers, against roughly 50,000. On paper, the outcome seemed obvious. But battles aren't fought on paper. The company's leaders secretly negotiated with powerful figures inside the Bengal court. Promises were made. Money changed hands. When the battle began, much of the opposing army simply stood still. Within hours, the impossible had happened. The Battle of Plassey was over. A private company had defeated one of India's richest kingdoms. The victory transformed everything. The company didn't just gain trade rights, it gained political control. And with political control came taxes. Now something extraordinary happened. Instead of relying on investors in London, the company began using Indian tax revenue to finance its expansion. India was paying for its own conquest. Every new territory funded the next campaign. It became a machine that fed itself. Part 4. When a corporation becomes a government. Imagine if Amazon or Apple had its own military, collected taxes, ran courts, printed money, negotiated treaties, and governed hundreds of cities. That sounds impossible today. Yet that's exactly what the East India Company became. By the early 19th century, it ruled enormous parts of the Indian subcontinent. It employed hundreds of thousands of soldiers, far more than Britain's own standing army. Company officials weren't elected. They answered to shareholders. Their job wasn't to improve lives. Their job was to generate returns. And those incentives mattered. Taxes increased. Traditional industries were reshaped to serve global markets. Farmers were encouraged or pressured to grow profitable export crops instead of food. Profits in London reached astonishing levels. Meanwhile, millions of ordinary people saw little benefit. The gap between corporate success and public suffering continued to grow. Part 5. The cost of profit. Power without accountability rarely ends well. The East India Company proved that. Corruption spread throughout the administration. Officials enriched themselves through private deals. Some returned to Britain unbelievably wealthy. Critics nicknamed them nabobs. Their fortunes had been made thousands of miles away. Then disaster struck. In 1770, a devastating famine swept across Bengal. Crop failures combined with heavy taxation left millions vulnerable. Historians estimate that around 10 million people may have died. The exact causes remain debated. Natural factors played a role. But many argue the company's economic policies made the catastrophe far worse. Even as people starved, revenue collection often continued. Back in Britain, people began asking difficult questions. Should a corporation possess this much power? Could shareholders be trusted to govern millions? Was profit compatible with empire? For the first time, the British government began tightening its control over the company. But it was already deeply dependent on the wealth flowing from India. Separating business from empire would prove far more difficult than anyone imagined. Part 6. The spark that lit the fire. By the middle of the 19th century, resentment had spread across India. Some rulers had lost their kingdoms. Farmers struggled under taxation. Traditional elites had seen their influence disappear. Many Indian soldiers serving in the company's army felt increasingly alienated. Then came a seemingly small decision. New rifle cartridges. According to widespread rumors, soldiers had to bite open cartridges coated with animal fat before loading them. For Hindu soldiers, cows were sacred. For Muslim soldiers, pigs were forbidden. Whether every rumor was true almost didn't matter. Trust had already collapsed. In 1857, the rebellion began. What started among soldiers quickly spread across northern India. Cities erupted. Old rulers returned. Civilians joined the fighting. For months, the company struggled to contain the uprising. The conflict became one of the bloodiest wars in the company's history. Eventually, British reinforcements crushed the rebellion. But something fundamental had changed. The illusion was broken. A private company could no longer govern an empire of this size. Ending. The company that changed the world. In 1858, the British government dissolved the East India Company's rule. Its territories were transferred directly to the British Crown. The period known as the British Raj had begun. The company survived only a few more years before disappearing entirely. But its legacy never really vanished. The East India Company pioneered ideas that define modern corporations: shareholders, global supply chains, multinational business, corporate lobbying, private influence over governments. It demonstrated something the world had never seen before: that wealth could become power, power could become government, and government could exist primarily to protect wealth. Most companies today don't raise armies or conquer nations. But the questions the East India Company raised still haven't disappeared. How much influence should corporations have? Who keeps powerful businesses accountable? And what happens when the pursuit of profit becomes more powerful than the people it affects? Because the most extraordinary part of this story isn't that a company once ruled a country, it's that it began with something so ordinary, a group of investors looking for a better return. And history has shown that sometimes the most dangerous empires don't begin with an army, they begin with a business plan.